Hi everybody, my name is Michelle the Bookworm, and for this video I just want to go over the progress that I've made for uh, 2019. So in the beginning of this year I set out some pretty aspirational goals. I wanted to read 24 books in 2019. I'll leave you a link in the description below for that video that tells you more about my goals for this year. But um, July, it is officially halfway through 2019, and I just wanted to update you about how those goals were going. So my goals were to read 24 books in 2019, and my current progress is 19 books, which is really, really, really cool. Um, so I will most likely accomplish my 24 book goal for 2019 by the end of this month because the readathon is coming up. And so for the rest, I'm very excited. I'm really proud of myself for how much I've read this year and how much I've gotten back into reading. So during this, I've definitely read a lot of books this year, but I wanted to go over my least favorites and also my favorites. So for for this video, I wanted to talk about my top 3 books and my bottom 3 books for this year. So this was really hard for me. I do have a grading system, and I'm pretty critical about the books that I grade already, but there are some that, I already know which ones were my top favorites, obviously, but finding that were my top favorites and my least favorites, but it was really hard picking between, the 2s and the 3s, or the 4s and the 2s, which ones were, kind of in between. But I was able to do it. So for my top 3 that I really, really enjoyed for this year was number 3 was Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen. This book really, it was really interesting because Susanna, it was a memoir basically, and it was so personal, and the way that Susanna's described mental illness really showed it in a light that it wasn't this scary, it wasn't something to be joked about, it wasn't something to be used as a trope. And mental illness doesn't have to really define who you are as a person, and that there are other traits to you as well, and that you don't have to be defined by this mental illness. So that book really impacted me in various different ways. I absolutely loved it. It was one of the top 3 books that I read this year. I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. And it was one of my spontaneous buys. I'm starting to find that my spontaneous book buys are actually some of the best books I have. So the second book my number 2 book for this year, really surprised me how much I really enjoyed this book. My number 2 favorite this year was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson. I read this book because it was part of my 100 essential books to read in your lifetime list, and I needed an audiobook to listen to while I went to sleep. And I had no idea the impact this book would have on me. This book for those of you who don't know, it follows this little girl from India whose parents dies and she's forced to move to England, specifically Yorkshire, and she just kind of through her exploration of nature and life, she blossoms into this her own wonderful person, and she finds this goodness about her through nature, and she shares this goodness with others, and it just really inspired me and reminded me of my own connection that I have with nature that I had forgotten about for the longest time. So for me, it was a really personal, like, kind of inspiring book about, depression and how that's, again, mental illness, and how it's portrayed in old novels, particularly, and how you can basically heal yourself through nature. It was an extremely powerful book in that way. And my number one book for this year, some people may think it's a cop-out, but whatever, is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I read it for one of my readathons, and honestly, I do have now that I'm rereading the series, I do have some critiques about the books, but for me, it's my number one favorite because Harry Potter had just such a huge impact on my life, and the third book of the series really was one of my favorites, and reading that in a picture book was just an amazing experience. So I gave it a 5 out of 5 because of the nostalgia and the comfort of reading it in picture book form. I absolutely loved it. Yeah, it's one of my favorite books of all time, I think. So, I'm pretty harsh when it comes to grading. As you can see, I've only given 2 books this year a 5-star rating, and one of them was purely for nostalgia. There are some books that I really didn't like this year. So I'm going to start at my third least favorite this year. And my third least favorite book for this year is Lucifer Coldhaven by Holly Black. It's a graphic novel, it's a comic book basically, about Lucifer, and I think that the show is actually based on this book series. Actually, I'm pretty sure it is, but I will say that I'm a little bit prejudiced. I'm not hugely fond of graphic novels. I do understand the appeal to them, but they're also not exactly my cup of tea, so I will give it that. However, I also have read quite a few graphic novels, and this one didn't explain a lot, and when it did, it was in big block chunks. And I just didn't really like that. Plus, I read it in like a couple of hours, so it didn't really like captivate me, So I gave that one a 3 out of 5. My second to least favorite was actually a book that was on my 100 essential books to read in your lifetime list, and it was Antigone by Sophocles. Yes, it's a classic novel by one of our greatest thinkers of all time, and I listened to it. So Antigone is about this girl whose family, there was a war and her family ended up being on the losing side of the war. So she went and buried her family, her kin, and she's getting in trouble for it because I guess that, the losing side isn't allowed to have a burial. And this is all about her dilemma of like standing up for what's right, which I totally get. But I think that this argument is just, for me personally, I've read a lot of classics, and I'm sure at this time this was a really huge issue, but I've heard this argument before. I've heard it in Shakespeare a lot, and I've heard it in, I've just heard it a lot. And I've heard it in the Iliad by Homer, and that was it. That was the whole moral of the story, is that even the losing side deserves a burial. And I didn't learn anything from it. I guess that's why I gave it. So I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5. It was nice. I really enjoyed the language, but I really don't feel like I took anything from it. I don't think I learned anything from it, which is something that I really need when I read a book. I want to be able to take something from it. I want it to kind of change me, you know what I mean? And I don't feel like this book did that for me. And my absolute least favorite book of this year, and some booktubers are actually probably going to disagree with me because I've heard some booktubers say that this was one of their favorites. My absolute least favorite book for this year, and the only one I didn't finish, yes, you heard me correctly, I didn't actually finish this book. I disliked it that much, was Save the Date by Morgan Matson. This book was part of one of my Goodreads readathon challenges. It was a book of the month, and I actually got pretty far into it. I got 207 pages in out of a 460-page book. So I read halfway through it, and I still did not like it. I really didn't like it. It's basically about this girl whose sister or brother is getting married, and she's trying to find a date for the wedding. So first of all, it's a rom-com, which I'm not really into, and it's just drama, like planted drama. It's needless drama is what this book has, and it's never ending. There's plot twists that don't really need to be there. It's an obvious setup that she's going to end up with this one guy that she almost hooked up with last summer, but actually didn't end up happening. It's predictable, it's cliche, and honestly, it was really boring and almost cringy with its type of content. Maybe that just shows that rom-com is not for me. Because obviously some other booktubers really enjoyed it. They said that it was a fun read. I tried, and I couldn't do it. So that is my least favorite book this year so far, is Save the Date. Yeah. Again, these are just my opinions, and I'm not going to apologize for them. So yeah, that is my books that I loved this year, the books that I hated this year, and I'm really excited to continue with my progress. I feel like I'm really reaching my reading goals this year. I'm really excited about that. I've been keeping sort of consistent with my booktube content. I would like to be more punctual about uploading, but now that I finally moved, hopefully that won't be as big of a problem anymore. Anyway, feel free to, I'm also going to leave in the comments below just my grades for any of my other books this year, so feel free to check out what I've read this year and see what ratings I gave the other books. And feel free to leave a comment in the link below. What was your favorite book this year? Or your top 3 if you've read a lot. So give me your favorite book that you've read this year, or your top 3, and your least favorite book you've read this year, or your bottom 3. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. Yeah, feel free to leave a comment below, and I will see you next time. Alright, read on.